They tore out my windbreak while I was gone, so I let the land answer for me. Not with lawyers, not with yelling, just wind, dirt, and time. And by the time they realized what they'd done, it was already too late to stop it. My name's Daniel Mercer. Most folks around here just call me Dan, and I've been working the same stretch of land outside Red Hollow, New Mexico for close to 30 years now. It's not the kind of place that looks impressive in photos. No rolling green hills, no postcard sunsets framed by white fences, just dry soil, stubborn grass, and a horizon that doesn't give you much unless you've earned it. But if you spend enough time out here, you start to understand that survival isn't about how pretty something looks. It's about how well it holds together when the wind comes. That's what those trees were for. About 20 years ago, after a particularly bad season where the wind stripped half my topsoil clean off the western pasture, I planted a line of cedar and mesquite along the boundary. Took me weeks, digging each one in by hand, hauling water out there in the heat, talking to them like they were livestock just to keep myself sane. Folks laughed at me back then, said I was planting sticks in dust, wasting time on something that wouldn't make a dollar. But a few years later, when the windstorms came and my fields held while others didn't, they stopped laughing. Those trees weren't decoration. They were infrastructure. A living wall that slowed the wind just enough to keep the soil where it belonged. Without them, the land doesn't just get messy, it starts to disappear. Now, for most of my life, the only thing west of that tree line was empty land, miles of it, nothing but scrub and silence. Then about 3 years ago, everything changed. Big development company came in, bought up that land, and in less than a year they turned it into one of those gated communities you see advertised on billboards. Polished roads, identical houses, manicured lawns that looked like they'd never met real weather. They called it Silver Ridge Estates, which I always thought was funny considering there wasn't a ridge or anything silver about it. At first, I kept to myself. Figured they'd keep to theirs. But that didn't last long. One afternoon, not long after they opened, a black SUV rolled up to my gate, clean enough to reflect the sky. Out stepped a woman in her 40s, sharp blazer, confident posture, the kind of smile that's been practiced in mirrors. She introduced herself as Evelyn Carter, president of the Homeowners Association over at Silver Ridge. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard you're the man who knows this land better than anyone." I shook her hand, nodded once. "Been here long enough." She glanced past me, toward the tree line. "It's quite rustic. Charming, in its own way." That word, charming. I'd heard it before, usually from people who didn't understand what they were looking at. She got to the point quick. Said some of the residents had mentioned that the trees along our shared boundary were blocking the sunset view from their clubhouse. Apparently they'd built this big balcony facing west, expecting wide open desert skies, and instead they got a wall of green and brown. "We were wondering," she said, still smiling, "if you might consider trimming them back, just enough to open up the view. We'd be happy to cover the cost, of course." I remember leaning against the fence, looking out at those trees, the way the wind moved through them, slowed, softened, controlled. Then I looked back at her. "Sunsets are free," I said, "but those trees aren't." Her smile held, but just barely. "I understand they're important to you, but we're only asking for a compromise." "There's no compromise on that line," I replied, tapping the fence post. "You cut into that. You're not just changing a view, you're changing how the land behaves." She paused, studied me for a second like she was trying to decide if I was being stubborn or just uneducated. Then she gave a small nod. "Well, I appreciate your time, Mr. Mercer. If you reconsider, my office is always open." I watched her drive off, tires barely kicking up dust, and I had a feeling that conversation wasn't really over, just postponed. A couple weeks later, I got an invitation, not a request, an invitation to attend one of their HOA meetings. Thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. So I went. Place was exactly what you'd expect. Clean floors, soft lighting, people sitting in neat rows like they were waiting for a presentation instead of a discussion. Evelyn stood at the front, clicking through slides about community enhancements and aesthetic cohesion. And sure enough, there it was, a photo of my tree line. "This," she said, pointing at the screen, "is currently obstructing one of our community's most valuable visual assets." I actually laughed, couldn't help it. A few heads turned. "That obstruction," I said, loud enough for the room, is the only thing keeping my soil from ending up in your living rooms." The room went quiet. Evelyn kept her composure, but I could see the irritation creeping in. "With respect, Mr. Mercer," she said, "our consultants have assured us that selective clearing would not have any significant environmental impact." "Your consultants ever worked a dust storm out here?" I asked. No answer. Meeting ended not long after that. No agreement. No resolution. Just a polite kind of tension that sits under the surface like a fault line waiting to move. A few days later, I left town for a 4-day agricultural seminar down south. Didn't think much of it at the time. Left everything as it always was. Cattle fed, fences checked, trees standing where they'd stood for decades. And when I came back, the first thing I noticed wasn't what I saw. It was what I couldn't. The horizon looked wrong. The wind hit my truck harder than usual as I drove up, carrying more dust than I'd ever seen this time of year. And when I reached the western boundary, I slowed down, then stopped completely. Because the trees were gone. Not trimmed, not thinned, gone. I just sat there for a second, engine still running, hands on the wheel, staring at that empty stretch like my brain needed a moment to catch up with what my eyes were already telling it. Because where there had been a living wall, years of work, decades of protection, there was now nothing but jagged stumps and raw dirt, like someone had taken a blade and shaved the land down to the bone. I stepped out of the truck slowly, boots hitting the ground a little heavier than usual, and the first thing I noticed was the smell, fresh cut wood mixed with diesel and hot metal, the kind of scent that doesn't belong on a ranch unless something's gone very wrong. I walked the line in silence, counting stumps without meaning to, one after another, each one a reminder that this wasn't an accident. This was planned, deliberate, executed while I was out of town like they knew exactly when I wouldn't be there to stop it. Deep tire tracks cut across my property, wide enough for heavy machinery, and the soil, once packed and stable under those trees, was already loosening, fine grains shifting under my boots with every step. Then I saw it, taped neatly to one of my fence posts like a badge of authority. A laminated notice. Vegetation clearance conducted to improve visibility and reduce fire risk in accordance with community safety standards. No signature. No apology. Just a clean, corporate sentence trying to dress up something ugly. I actually let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable it almost felt lazy. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every stump, every track, every inch of disturbed ground. Then I walked a little further and found something better. Fresh scrape marks where their equipment had crossed the boundary line, not just close to it, but over it. They hadn't just touched my land, they'd worked it. That's when the anger hit. Not loud, not explosive, just a steady, rising pressure, like heat building under a closed lid. I didn't call them right away. Instead, I drove back to the house, grabbed a bottle of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and let myself think. Because out here, reacting fast usually means reacting wrong. And I wasn't about to make that mistake. See, most people, when something like this happens, they go straight to confrontation, lawyers, police, shouting matches at the fence line. And sure, I could have done that. I had every right. But standing there earlier, feeling that loose soil shift under my boots, I realized something they clearly hadn't. They didn't understand what they'd actually removed. Those trees weren't just blocking a view, they were holding back a process. A natural one. Predictable. Patient. And now it had nothing in its way. That evening, I walked back out to the boundary as the sun dropped low, and for the first time in 20 years, the wind came through completely unfiltered, no resistance, no break, just a steady push rolling across open ground. I watched the surface of the soil start to move, not much, just a thin layer at first, like a whisper across the earth, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what I already knew. So I made a decision. If they wanted the trees gone, I wasn't going to replace them right away. I was going to let them feel exactly what those trees had been doing for all these years. That night, I fired up the tractor. Old machine, loud as hell, but reliable. I hitched up the grading blade and drove out to that cleared strip under a sky full of stars, the kind of sky you only get when there's no city light to soften it. The air was dry, even for this place, and the forecast I'd checked earlier showed strong winds coming in the next day, steady, fast, sustained. Perfect. I started slow, dragging the blade across the ground, breaking up the surface that was already disturbed. back and forth, over and over, turning chunks into finer and finer particles, loosening everything that had once been held together by roots. It wasn't destruction, not really. It was preparation. At one point, my neighbor, Luis, drove up in his pickup, headlights cutting across the field. He stepped out, leaned on the fence, watching me work. "Dan," he called out over the engine noise. "What the hell happened here?" I shut the tractor down for a minute, the sudden silence ringing in my ears. "They cleared it," I said, nodding toward the subdivision. "All of it?" he asked, eyes scanning the empty line. "All of it." He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "That's not just stupid, that's expensive stupid." I smirked a little. "Yeah, it's about to get more expensive." He looked at me, really looked this time, like he was trying to read something behind my words. "You planning something?" I took a sip of water, glanced out at the open land, then back at him. "No," I said calmly. "I'm just not stopping what comes next." He stared for a second longer, then chuckled under his breath. "Well, I guess they're about to learn." "Yeah," I said, climbing back onto the tractor. "They are." I worked through most of the night, not rushing, just being thorough, making sure the entire stretch was evenly loosened, no hard patches left to hold things down. By the time the sky started to lighten in the east, the ground between my ranch and Silver Ridge was exactly what I needed it to be: unstable. I parked the tractor, wiped the dust off my hands, and stood there for a moment, watching the first hint of sunlight creep over the horizon. It was quiet, too quiet, because I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Around midday, the wind started to pick up. At first, it was just a breeze, nothing unusual, the kind of movement you feel every day out here. But then it built, steady, consistent, pushing harder with each passing hour. I checked the weather again, gusts pushing close to 40 miles per hour. And that's when the land started to move. It began as a low ripple across the surface, like something breathing just beneath the soil. Then the top layer lifted, thin sheets of dust peeling away and rising into the air. Within minutes, it turned into rolling clouds, thick, heavy, carried straight west to east, straight toward Silver Ridge. I walked up to the fence line and watched it happen, arms resting on the post, completely still as the wind did exactly what it's always done out here. It took what wasn't anchored and carried it. The first wave hit their outer road like a fog, swallowing the clean asphalt in a layer of brown. Then came more and more, each gust lifting another sheet of soil, stacking it, pushing it forward, building something bigger with every second. I could just barely make out the entrance to their subdivision through the growing haze, those tall stone pillars, the decorative gravel beds, the perfectly arranged shrubs imported from somewhere that probably didn't even have wind like this. And then, they started to disappear. Cars slowed to a crawl, headlights cutting through dust that kept getting thicker, heavier, turning the air into something you could almost grab with your hands. Sand piled up against curbs, spilled over sidewalks, buried the edges of their landscaping like it had been there for years instead of minutes. By late afternoon, you couldn't see the entrance anymore. It was just gone, and I stood there, watching, not smiling, not celebrating, just taking it in, because this wasn't revenge in the way most people think. This was consequence. Pure, simple, unavoidable. And right about the time the first emergency vehicles started trying to push their way through the mess, my phone rang. My phone didn't just ring. It started lighting up like I'd suddenly become the most popular man in 3 counties, calls stacking on top of each other, numbers I didn't recognize, a few I did, and right there at the top, exactly where I expected it, was Evelyn Carter. I let it ring a couple times, not out of spite, just to give myself a second to breathe, then I answered. "Daniel." She snapped the moment I picked up, no greeting, no politeness left, just pure pressure. "What did you do?" I leaned back against the fence, eyes still on the wall of dust rolling through her pristine little entrance. "Afternoon, Evelyn." "Don't do that," she cut in. "Do not play games with me right now. Our entire access road is buried, residents are stuck. We have emergency crews trying to clear." "I didn't bulldoze anything," I said calmly, talking right over her without raising my voice. "I didn't touch your property. I didn't cross your line. All I did was manage my land after someone else decided to remove a critical barrier without permission." There was a pause on the other end, just a second, but enough to tell me she knew exactly where this was going. "This is intentional," she said, quieter now but sharper. You knew this would happen. I let that sit for a beat, the wind howling in the background, carrying more soil across what used to be a clean boundary. No, I replied, almost conversational. I understood what would happen. There's a difference. You're causing damage, she pushed, her voice tightening again. We will hold you responsible for. You might want to be careful with that, I said, still steady, still even. Because I've got drone footage of your contractors crossing onto my land. I've got photos, timestamps, tire tracks, the whole thing. And I've already shared it with a local news station that loves a good story about property rights and environmental negligence. Silence again, longer this time. Out in the distance, I could hear engines, heavy equipment trying to push through what the wind kept rebuilding faster than they could clear it. You should probably focus on your road, I added. We can talk later. And I hung up. That night, the wind didn't let up. It shifted a little, changed direction just enough to spread the problem wider, not just at the entrance but along the inner roads, across driveways, up against garage doors. By morning, Silver Ridge didn't look like a luxury development anymore. It looked like something the desert had decided to reclaim. And the story spread fast. By the second day, a local news crew was out there, cameras rolling, capturing shots of buried signage, residents shoveling sand in expensive clothes, cars half stuck like they'd been abandoned mid-drive. They ran my footage too, the clips of heavy machinery crossing onto my land, tearing through the tree line, ignoring the boundary markers like they didn't matter. Public opinion turned quick. Because people might argue about views and property values, but they understand when someone crosses a line they shouldn't have. Luis came by again that afternoon, leaning against his truck, watching the cleanup efforts from a distance. You see the news? He asked, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Caught a bit of it, I said. They're tearing their own board apart, he chuckled. Folks paid good money to live out here, didn't expect to wake up in a sand trap. I nodded, not saying much, because honestly, I wasn't enjoying it the way he was. There's a difference between wanting someone to understand a mistake and watching them drown in it. Still, I didn't step in. Not yet. By the end of the week, the calls changed. No more threats. No more accusations. Now it was requests. Then it was meetings. Evelyn came back out in person, but this time there was no SUV shine, no polished introduction. She looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept much, blazer replaced with something more practical, dust on her shoes that she didn't bother brushing off. Daniel, she said, standing on the other side of the fence, her voice measured, controlled, but very different from before. We need to resolve this. I walked up, rested my arms on the same post I had the day we first met. Looks like you've got a situation. She exhaled slowly, nodding once. We're prepared to take responsibility for the tree removal. That's a start, I said. We'll fund the replanting, she continued. Full restoration of the windbreak, whatever species mix you recommend, irrigation support if needed, and temporary barriers until the trees establish. I watched her carefully, letting her lay it all out. And compensation, she added, for any losses you've incurred. I tilted my head slightly. Livestock stress, soil destabilization, time, labor, it adds up. We understand, she said. We're willing to negotiate a fair amount. That word again, fair. I looked past her, toward the subdivision, where crews were still working, still fighting a problem they couldn't fully control yet. Then I looked back at her. I'm not interested in a one-time payment, I said. She frowned slightly. What are you proposing? You rebuild the windbreak, I said, counting it off calmly. At your expense. You maintain it permanently, not just until it looks good again. And on top of that, you pay a land protection fee. $5,000 a month. 5 years. Her eyes widened just a fraction. That's less than what this will cost you if it happens again, I cut in gently. And it will, if that line isn't respected. She held my gaze, calculating, weighing options she didn't really have anymore. 5 years, she repeated. Miss one payment. I added, my tone still even, almost casual, and I stopped stabilizing the soil on my side. I won't break anything. I just won't help it hold. The wind picked up again right then, almost on cue, sending a thin sheet of dust skimming across the ground between us. She noticed. Of course she did. After a long moment, she nodded. We'll need board approval. Then you should probably get it quick, I said. They signed within 3 days. Replanting started the following week, Crews working carefully this time, staying exactly where they were supposed to, measuring, marking, asking questions they should have asked the first time. Temporary barriers went up, not pretty, but effective, and slowly, the land started to settle again. Not immediately. That kind of damage doesn't just disappear overnight, but it stabilized. And over the next couple months, as the new trees took root, you could feel the difference, the wind breaking just enough, the soil staying where it belonged, doing what it had always done when someone respected how it worked. Evelyn came by once more after everything was in place. No agenda this time, just quiet. "We should have listened," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "You should have." She gave a small, tired smile. "I guess we were too focused on how things looked." "That's usually how it starts," I said. "Out here, though, how it works matters more." She nodded, like that finally made sense in a way it hadn't before, then turned and walked back toward her car, a little slower than the first time I'd seen her. And that was that. Or at least, that's where most people think the story ends. But every now and then, when the wind picks up and I stand out there by that line of young trees, I catch myself wondering something I never really had to think about before. Did I go too far? I didn't lie. I didn't trespass. I didn't destroy anything that wasn't already set in motion. But I also didn't stop it. I saw what was coming, and I let it happen. Some folks around here say it was justified, that they got exactly what they deserved. Others think I could have warned them, given them a chance to fix it before things got that bad. And honestly, I'm not sure there's a clean answer. So I'll leave that part to you. If you were standing where I was, knowing what they'd done and what was about to happen, would you have stepped in? Or would you have let the land teach the lesson? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you want more stories like this, the kind that don't always have a simple right or wrong, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around.